Hello, I'm Joanne Limburg. I'm a writer and poet. I'm looking forward to talking to Deirdre today, and I'm going to start this recording by reading a poem from my book, The Autistic Alice. Here it is. And the poem is called Advice for Alice. Alice, people are not curiosities for you to stare at. They see you seeing them. They see you back. People are not chess pieces to be moved from square to square. They will not stay where you have put them. They are not lessons to be learned or verse to be recited. They are not information. You can't have them by heart. Alice, they're not just figures in your dreams. They have their own, and you might not be in them. There's no symmetry, no equity, no Caucasus race. You could swim an age in tears, then run yourself bone dry, and still be left without a prize. Alice, mind you don't confuse your prepositions. You should be in love with, not at.
I love that sequence of Alice poems. When did you hit on that? I mean, you talk about loving the Alice book when you were young. How did you hit on using that as a sequence, as a way into a collection?
Well, I was diagnosed with autism in 2012 when I was 42. And that left me with this sense that I needed to sort of recapture my life, and in particular my childhood, because I realised it was the childhood of an undiagnosed autistic girl. And I thought about various ways of doing it, and I started writing some poems which just sat on their own. And then I remembered Alice, and I thought about the way that Alice moves through a world, a social world that's very arbitrary, and she's positioned as this very reasonable, rational person who's assailed by all these illogical, capriciously changing norms. And I thought that's rather like being an autistic child. And then I realized that my interest in the Alice books, and in the book called The Annotated Alice, which is an edition by Martin Gardner, where he annotates both books with biographical things and mathematical things and all sorts, that my love for that was quite autistic in its way. And I remembered as well that although you can't diagnose people posthumously, that Lewis Carroll in many ways was what we now call very spectrumy. And I suddenly realized that by putting myself in the third person and calling myself Alice, I could make use of that text. So, for example, in the poem I just read, there are lots and lots of references to both books, and also get some distance from myself and take a look at that child. And it turned out to be the right thing, because once I decided these were the Autistic Alice poems, a lot of them arrived at once.
I love that sequence. You talk in your memoir, The Woman Who Thought Too Much, about wanting to be a writer. You identified that wish and actually the intention when you were very young, before you left primary school. But when did you actually decide, well, this is it, I am a writer?
Well, the story I tell, and it probably took longer than that, but the way I remember it now is that when I was 9, we were set an exercise to do in the class. We were shown this poem about November, and it was a list of no leaves, no trees, no this, no that, all is no in November. And so I wrote my version, and the teacher said, that's better than the original one. You're very lucky. You're talented at something. And I thought, oh, I like that idea. And I'd enjoyed doing it. And the idea that I could both enjoy doing it and be good at it, and that people will be pleased with it. Well, you know, how can you want any more than that?
Of course, it took you a long time. I mean, you know, your first collection, it does look like now your career as a writer, as you got attention immediately. You know, good reviews for your first collection. But when, like, how did you get to that process of actually putting a collection together and getting it out? Because that did take a while, didn't it?
Well, it was you could look at it as a struggle. You could, if you look from the age of 9, writing that poem, to publishing my first collection at 30, it actually took 20 years from the intention to publishing a first book. And I wasn't sure what sort of writer I should be. I tried writing novels in my very early teens, and they would all last about 10 pages. And I tried writing essays, and then I got very into comedy, which I still love. And I applied to Cambridge, not for any academic reason, but because I wanted to be in Footlights, which didn't quite work out. When that didn't quite work out, I felt completely stuck, because I was so set on that course. I thought, oh, maybe I'm not a writer after all. But then I started from the beginning again. Just after, when I finished university, I took an Open College of the Arts correspondence course, and it was correspondence in those days. Things went and arrived in envelopes, which seems like so quaint now. And it was an introductory course, and it had, I think, poetry and fiction, possibly drama as well, I can't remember. But I went in thinking I was going to be a novelist, and came out realizing that at that point I was a poet, if I was anything.
But you do write, I mean, you've written a novel about Queen Anne, and of course you're an academic writer. It did strike me as you were talking about the Annotated Alice, actually, because you have written in small pieces that you're very good at doing that academic commentary on your own work. You know, that you analyze why you write, where it comes from, the sources of it, and then what you have produced. You know, the annotated Joanne is going on there, if you like. So tell me as well about, you come from the Jewish tradition, that what you're writing does is a very Jewish thing, in that it's a testimony and you bear witness. Like lots and lots of your work, like your poetry, comes from out of memoir and autobiographical impulse. Do you think that's you know, that's an inspiration for you?
I don't know that that's an especially Jewish thing. I mean, I suppose on the one hand, when you've grown up with Jewish history and Judaism and Jewish trauma, you're always being told to remember. Judaism is a religion where you're being told always to remember things and to remember traumatic things, and you're supposed to carry them with you. And it's a bad thing if you drop that memory, because if you let that memory drop, it's as if all those people lived for nothing, and you've dropped your family, and you've dropped your whole people. So I suppose there's the sense of what Shoshana Feldman calls the appointment to bear witness just by being Jewish. But I think the confessional impulse is, in a way, well, the individual confessional impulse is very not Jewish, I think.
Right. Of course, yes. I was looking at Clem Cisse last night, talking about his life, and yeah, you're right. Lots of authors process things by writing about them. What are you writing at the moment?
Well, I'm waiting to see what edits are needed on a book I've just delivered to Atlantic Books. It's called Letters to My Weird Sisters, and it does carry on in that tradition. It's 4 essays. There's an introduction, a conclusion as well, in the form of letters to women from the past who we might now regard as autistic or neurodivergent. And I don't diagnose any of them. You can't, and you shouldn't. But I thought these are lives that support an autistic reading. And I was thinking of, it's a specifically feminist book. I was thinking about all the ways which my autism has, you know, to use a current term, intersected with my femaleness, and all the ways in which I've not been a conforming woman that I can now see are linked with my autism. So I choose 4 women. The first one is Virginia Woolf. And what sort of led me into her was her sort of lifelong interest in clothes and grooming, but a struggle with it. She wanted to experiment on the one hand, and on the other hand, she felt she couldn't get it right, and she was anxious all the time that she had stepped into the wrong space in the wrong clothes. And it was a source of real anguish. I mean, these things aren't trivial when they cause you that much anxiety and when you're judged that much for them. And the second one is to a woman called Adelheid Bloch, who was and this is very much a bearing witness thing, she wasn't just Jewish, she was also disabled. And it was because of her cognitive disability that she was murdered by the Nazis. Because the first people they murdered en masse were disabled people. And then the third one is to the mother of one of Asperger's patients, who's just referred to as Frau V. And he describes her in some detail. And it's quite clear that she was what my husband would call one of your lot, from the way he described her. And I think both autistic mothers and mothers of autistic people have struggled. And so I address both in that essay, and also the overlap between them. Because I think some, not all, but some of the issues in the literature come out of sort of misunderstandings and misrecognitions between autistic parents and neurotypical clinicians, and a misunderstanding of the style of parenting. And then the fourth and final one is to another mother. It's to Katrina Kepler, the mother of the astronomer Johannes Kepler, who he defended in a witch trial. And she was not a very conventionally feminine woman in some ways. I mean, anyone could get accused of being a witch. It was a very easy thing to do, whether you were male or female. But probably what didn't help her was that she was quite awkward. She was quite insistent. When she thought she was right, she didn't back down. She persevered. She didn't necessarily make eye contact in the usual way, or that because of all his detailed addresses of, because there's so much on the record from her trial and from his defense of her. You see all these details of this woman emerging. And so she would talk across people rather than to them. And she didn't cry. And this lack of crying was seen as a lack of a sign of womanly softness and a lack of sign of repentance. It was probably no such thing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. In Alice, you talk about being dressed as a girl to be looked at, like how much we're expected to perform as women, and if you don't fit into exactly. That, yeah. Has the lockdown helped with the writing, or has it made any difference?
Oh, well, it just gave me something to do. I mean, I haven't had access to the library, which is annoying, but I just had to sort of sit down and carry on. And in a sense, I don't know, the lockdown helped with the writing. I think the writing helped with the lockdown.
Yeah. I suppose for lots of writers, life is anyway sitting at home in front of the computer and finding a lot of time on your own.
Exactly, and dealing with your experiences of loneliness or boredom or frustration or whatever comes up.
Your son is old enough, you didn't have to get involved with homeschooling. That lots of parents have talked about.
And he just continued attending the sixth form remotely. I think if he'd been younger, the writing would have had to stop, probably.
Yeah, yes, it's been very strange, I think, for parents of young children. I know you, I saw the recording you did for the Science, Poetry and the Brain.
Oh, yes.
About the butterfly. Is that a project that just came out of the lockdown, or was it pre-planned?
No, this was something that was done last year. And initially in last October, it was done as a live performance at Lucy Cavendish College. So Jane Greatorex, who's the senior tutor of Lucy Cavendish College, she wanted to get some scientists and some poets together to collaborate, to write about poetry and the brain. And the other 7 were dealing with human brains with some way or another, but I was paired with a biologist who works with a butterfly, Heliconius butterfly. You can see this on the Lucy Cavendish site, by the way. And they study the brain of this butterfly because it's a very unusual butterfly. It has habitual that it uses. Well, for a start, it pollinates, and most butterflies don't. And it has habitual routes it uses to get to and from its roost, to where it reproduces, to where it eats, and to where it roosts again, and to where it pollinates. And it's got an unusual brain. It's got these unusually large, they're called mushroom bodies. And insects have them when they're to do with memory and direction and so on. And it's unique among butterflies in being able to remember its way around and to have a way around. And it's a really remarkable little animal.
Yeah, the way you write about it, that, you know, for us it's terribly unusual, and in some ways seems to be acting more like a bee. But,
Yes.
you know, that obviously the butterfly doesn't know there's anything unusual about it. It is a very beautiful little sequence. Yeah, have you done any other collaborative work that's come out during lockdown, or?
Well, under lockdown, I wrote an essay for Marina Benjamin's anthology, which you can get from Dodo Inc. And I should plug it because it's only, I think, £2.40, and all the proceeds go to Refuge. And she asked a load of writers to write blogs, poems, whatever, in response to lockdown. And I'm in that. And at the time I wrote, it was quite near the beginning. I thought perhaps I had a mild case of COVID, very mild, but I felt awful. And so it was about writing when you're awful, when you feel awful, and about pushing yourself to be productive. And I think one thing that's come out of the lockdown for everyone is how we've been sort of strapped to this real wheel of productivity. And it's not necessary. We don't need to be just chucking out stuff and content at the rate we've been doing. We can't process it, we can't use it, it's not needed. And also it has a bad effect on our health. So it was reflecting on that.
That is true. I was wondering, you write about worrying about things and being anxious about things. And I mean, I work with students too. And what's it like to try and process something that is as strange and inexplicable as this? Because we go around carrying so many anxieties about what might happen. And, you know, what is it when, like, something awful has happened? Do you know what I mean? That we're worrying about catastrophes, and here we are in the middle of one, if you like.
I'm almost too punch drunk already to register it very much, because of various things have happened in my own life, and there's been, without going into details, some illness very close to me in the past couple of years. It's been nothing to do with COVID. And also, frankly, I've been terrified since June 2016. I've always assumed that Brexit was going to be a massive catastrophe, and I've been scared since then. So I almost didn't have any more capacity to get more scared. So I've just dealt with it. I mean, I've found it sad in a way, rather than it's made me anxious. It's made me sad. I've sort of grieved. But
you've had a lot of losses in your life anyway, with your brother and your parents, and you know, it's relatively recent.
Exactly. It's no surprise to me that, to put it bluntly, shit happens. And I worry about people. I worry less about myself than I worry about the society of which I'm part and the fabric of it, and what's happening to people and who's getting lost. And it's been a terrible time for disabled people, for cognitively disabled people, and autistic people and people with intellectual disabilities have died at a very much higher than usual rate. And that's not much talked about, because of course, when you talk about care homes, you think of elderly people, and that's not great either. But also disabled people are in care homes, and there are other places that are enclosed places, you know, certain supported living places, prisons for that matter, psychiatric hospitals. These people that are invisible. And I worry about that, and I get very upset about that. And I think because I'm aware of myself as disabled, as somebody who's written off as one of the most vulnerable in our society, you know, it's usually someone else, but it's not someone else, it's me. And I'm always aware of the precarity of my existence in a society like this anyway, with or without COVID. And I feel this has just brought something to the surface that was already there.
That's interesting. I mean, what you said about like the Nazis killing disabled people first, I didn't know that at all.
No, people don't. And it's interesting for a sort of interesting uses of interesting that they don't know. The first people to be killed with Zyklon B were disabled people.
There's a history that needs to be written, and so many gaps in that history. So,
Yes.
who inspires you? Like, who would you read, or what other writers do you read?
Oh, well, I love Hilary Mantel. I couldn't have written my book about Anne without her. I mean, who doesn't love Hilary Mantel? And I love Muriel Spark. I would love to write one of those tiny, perfect novels like her. I don't know if I ever will, but that's an ambition. And oh, there are lots of really good non-fiction writers. Everyone flies out of my head when someone asks me that question. But of course, Virginia Woolf. Everyone, again, loves Virginia Woolf. There's an American writer called Carmen Maria Machado, who, I can't remember the title of the book, unfortunately, off the top of my head, but this year she brought out this extraordinary memoir of being in an abusive relationship with another woman. And it's it's like a lyric essay sequence, but it so breaks the mold, and all the writing's fantastic, and she can just do anything. So she's inspiring.
Really interesting. I will ask you to send a list because people will add it at the end. And it's interesting. You keep using the word interesting, but it's not surprising to me that you like Muriel Spark, because you have that same humor writing. I know you're talking about Footlights, and you did have a go at comedy writing, but that she's able to be so funny. And this, the way she handles tone, that you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, she's one of the writers I feel brought up by, in a way. Yeah.
Fascinating way of dealing with the light and dark together.
Yes, and well, they are always braided together. You can't separate them.
Same level of humor, I think, into writing about things that can actually be very dark and sad. I mean, I love The Driver's Seat, but it's such a strange.
Oh my goodness! Oh, it's a terrifying book, actually. My favourite book of hers is Loitering with Intent, because it's about a writer and the writing mentality that I totally recognise. That what an awful person! How wonderful!
He's so funny, and the girl's slender means that somebody's a chain is upstairs doing her brain work. But she's hilarious. What do you think you're most proud of in your writing career?
Oh, undoubtedly Small Pieces, which I had help with because it was my PhD project. So I did a creative critical PhD. Well, yes, I did comment on my own work, and I don't think there's anything in that book I'd do differently. And I don't feel like that about anything else I've written. I mean, I don't know how well it's done in a worldly sense, but it's what I wanted it to be. And you can't often say that of work, very rarely. I don't seriously expect to be able to say it ever again.
It's a really good collection, and I remember you posting the I don't know whether it was on Facebook or Twitter, but even the cover looks beautiful. So when it arrived first, it's very beautiful looking.
This is the lovely shiny paperback. There was a lovely shiny hardback before that.
Do you choose your own covers? Because the cover on Autistic Alice is really it's really special and extraordinary.
That was one cover I did choose, actually. I mean, I have input. So I said and they do often listen to me. So for Atlantic, when they published the novel about Anne, I said, please not a headless bin in a frock, please. And they didn't. It was at the time, I think, oh gosh, the Miniaturist had just come out and text-based covers were fashionable. So we were able to do a nice text-based cover. I mean, for Small Pieces, I just waited to see what they did. But with Bloodaxe, Neil's great. He always asks if you have any ideas. He won't necessarily agree with you and take them, but he will ask. And I had a look at a lot of Alice art, and none of it was quite right. And a lot of Peter Blake and all sorts. It didn't quite fit. And then I put Through the Looking Glass into Google Images, and one of the things that came up was
It's a
this
wonderful
photo,
image.
yes, which is actually called Sunday Morning in November, but it looks like a girl on the other side of the glass. And it's by a Dutch photographer, and I got hold of him. And I think it's the only time he's ever given permission for it to be used.
Wonderful. And
Because
it's
he,
just struck me, yeah.
that
They're
it's
going as a kind of a circle. Did you say the first poem that you wrote about had something to do with November? That one that the teacher commented on?
oh, I hadn't even thought of that link. No.
It's only just struck me, you know, that it does kind of seem circular in a way, because so many of the Alice poems are about being small and, you know, that experience you had. You said about this book that you're just about to bring out, that you've just completed. Where do you see like the future work, or what are you planning on next? It's a terrible question to ask you when you've only just finished one book, but where do you think you're going next?
I'm honestly not sure. I think I have more to say about sort of human divergence and disability, which sounds like a huge project. I probably wind up saying something else about being Jewish as well. You can't seem to get away from it, especially not now. And I have unfinished business with Anne too, because the novel only took her up to the point just before she became queen. So I've still got the years that the film The Favourite covered to address.
Go back to us.
And I feel a
Why did
responsibility to do that.
why did you choose Anne in particular?
Well, in the first place, it was because I was using her as a way of addressing pregnancy loss and issues around pregnancy and maternity, because of course the poor woman had, was it 17 pregnancies and no heirs? And I just wanted a way of dealing with loss. And I was going to write a non-fiction book. I'm an accidental novelist. I never thought of myself as a novelist. But actually, I realized that the sort of things I wanted to talk about would mean filling things in myself and effectively writing fiction. And then the more I looked at her, the more interesting stuff there was, so the difficult relationships she had with her family. Because of course, you know, it's hard when you can't get the top job until a relative close to you dies. And there was the issue with her and her sister overthrowing her father, and the guilt with that, and the fallout with her sister, and that long relationship of whatever nature it was that she had with Sarah Churchill. There was so much there. And I like the fact that she didn't get to act much. She had to react. I liked what made her not a heroine.
I've been in that place where what you're expected to do is produce children, and you're always being looked at, always being judged, you know, at the time and afterwards by history. What did you think of the film?
Oh, I thought it was great fun. I mean, a lot of it, you know, I knew was quite a long way from the truth as I understood it. But I thought the basic truth of this triangular relationship between these three women, whether it was, I mean, it's impossible to know. Maybe it was physical, maybe it wasn't. We'll never know. In a sense, it doesn't matter. The point was there was this struggle between them. And it portrayed that. And I thought, actually, of all the characters, I thought Abigail, I don't think was as hard as that. I think that was part of her appeal. And she actually agreed politically with Anne, and Sarah didn't, which was totally left out, but was a huge part of what happened. But I thought the character that was closest to how I imagined, not physically, because she was a little blonde woman, was Sarah. I thought they had Sarah. I thought Abigail, I thought was too hard, or at least for my version. And Anne, I thought they left out her dutifulness and her kindness and her religiousness as well. They left out quite a lot of things that made her her. I mean, for example, there's one scene where she's standing in the window saying she's going to throw herself out, and I cannot believe that someone as religious as Anne would ever do that for a moment.
So much more with the story as a novelist than, well, maybe that's just from my point of view that I think you could, than in a film. But you see yourself primarily as a poet?
I see myself as a writer, and sometimes it comes out as poetry. I like non-fiction. I love essays. I'm really getting into the essay form. And I remember a long time ago wanting to write it, but in those days, it wasn't something you could publish. It wasn't something that seemed to exist as a category, as I understood it. There was fiction, and then there was sort of memoir or biographies or history books, and then there was poetry. But I've always liked things that meander about through different things. And I'm just so glad that in the last 10 years, maybe last 5 years in this country even, that's something that's become possible.
Yes. And different kinds of essays, like I interviewed Emily Pine recently,
Oh,
and
yes.
her memoir is a collection of 6 essays, which is, you know, a memoir, but also commenting and theorizing about her experience. And actually, come to think of it, you have something in common with that, in how you're able to integrate the theoretical thinking with the writing about the experience, which it makes it very interesting to read. We've run out of time, I see. So can you choose another poem for us, Joanne, please?
Yes, I'm going to choose a poem from another sequence in the book, The Oxygen Man, which first came out as a pamphlet with 5 leaves. Thank you very much, 5 leaves. Which was about losing my brother to suicide. And this is the final poem in that sequence, and it leads to how do I see myself as a writer. And it's called The Young Dead Poets. Lovely cop-outs. They left us behind, tidying up in second best bodies, straightening backs and grimacing, then bending down to tidy again, depressing chairs with leftover bodies, deleting a line, then writing again, straining not to repeat ourselves, repeating ourselves, repeating ourselves. Forgive us, please, for repeating ourselves, for being unlovely and not copping out, for staying behind to tidy up, to write, to fill the graceless decades.